Hello, and welcome to the Banker's Fresh Perspectives. I'm Joy Macknight, and joining me via video link is Mishal Ruparel, Head of Asia Pacific at Banking Circle, a next-generation payments bank, to talk about cryptocurrencies and digital assets. Thanks so much for joining me, Mish.
Thank you very much for having me.
So obviously anything crypto is a topic of interest, but obviously cryptocurrencies have been around and are relatively widely used for a while now. What is it that's really piquing the bank's interest in cryptocurrencies today?
I think the first item is, of course, trends, right? The market has grown incredibly fast. Conscious of the fact it's taken the hit over the last 6 months, but in its peak, we're looking at a market that was processing volumes in excess of $16 trillion. There were 300 million plus users that had crypto wallets worldwide. So these are huge numbers, and I think what we're seeing is that we as the bank, and I think many banks, are sort of sitting in the value chain, looking at payment service providers, merchant acquirers that are facilitating payments to exchanges, and that just grew at an incredible pace, which in effectively means more people are using their card to spend money on wallets that are used on exchanges. So naturally, many banks are looking at this space just by the sheer scale of how much the industry has grown. The second, I think, is there's just a lot of friction in the market when it comes to cross-border payments. First, directly when it comes to the use of fiat and crypto. So the term on-off ramps is quite frequently used. And there is a lot of friction when a user wants to start moving their fiat onto crypto ramps. But I think just looking at from an everyday perspective, if I'm, for example, sending money to a friend of mine in Australia, using traditional correspondent banks, that payment can take between 2 or 3 days. But when you start looking at potentially what blockchain could do, that's instant. That's a real-time payment. And I think for us as a bank, for many banks, we want to see how can we bring the internet, financial services, into the space in which how internet operate, which is very much sort of the ethos of where Web3 is moving to.
Okay, so you mentioned it there, which is Web3, which is sort of a decentralized version of the internet. What role are banks and other institutions playing in the development of Web3?
It's always, I think, for many banks and regulated entities, it's been quite a journey to get comfortable with the space. I think the first thing is banks need to get their strategy in order. So they need to really buy into this, and I think it's even more so important now, given the downturn. It's great when the market's growing at an incredible pace. Everyone sort of wants to jump on the bandwagon, but this is a real test of character now. The market's taken a hit. Do you really believe in what Web3 brings to banking, to cross-border payments, to international development, to the way the creative economy operates? So I think there's a real test of character. And I think all banks need to really sort of assess their strategy and make sure it's focused. And that really needs to come from the top, right? That's a decision at leadership level around the way in which a bank will operate in this space and sort of driving that strategy, which in turn will drive policies, procedures, all of the fun stuff that we live and breathe, AML, KYC, which is critical. Because I think without that trust, you will not get adoption when it means that users just do not trust what the bank is providing. So I think that's quite key. I think the second aspect is regulation. So we're seeing MiCA, for example, in Europe coming into force, hopefully soon. We are a strong believer in regulation. We believe that this is what the market needs. Again, it's the timing, right? If regulation like this came in 6 years ago, we would have not seen the innovation and growth that's been a big part of what Web3 stands for. So, but now that it's sort of scaled, it needs mass adoption. You need to have consumers comfortable with this. Regulation is going to be quite key. And then finally, trust. How do you bring trust into this environment? And I think banks can play a really key role in driving trust and adoption in this market. It will take time to rebuild trust. We need regulation, as regulation will bring trust and provide a framework to operate, which in turn will lead to mass adoption. And I see this I see what's happening today as a massive correction. The market grew too quick, it grew too fast, and we need to face up and sort of look at DeFi, work with DeFi, and see how we can operate and support this sort of new way of financial services within Web3.
Okay, you talked a little bit about strategy, and maybe we can look a little bit further out. What's really next for banks and crypto?
Yeah, I mean, this is a bit of a brain dump on all of the different areas that I think are really fascinating. But when banks start looking at Web3 and crypto, we've talked about cross-border payments, which is, I think, huge. Traceability, transparency. There's a lot there that banks can start adopting when it comes to cross-border payments utilizing blockchain. But there is a lot of work to do, and I've seen that across the industry to sort of adapt and get used to this new technology. I think stablecoins is really interesting. Yes, it's had a lot of bad press, but again, this is new, this is innovative. There is going to be a bit of a cleanup in the industry. And governments are looking at stablecoins quite closely and beginning to regulate this because it is just such a good mechanism for payments. And again, it's all about adopting the internet, the technology, and sort of embracing what Web3 brings to the world of financial services. And I think stablecoins is really key to that. We've talked about regulation. I can talk to death on what's happening within MiCA and regulation. Again, we're all living and breathing this, and it's important to get regulation right, not to stifle innovation. So there's always going to be a bit of a balance when it comes to regulation. Partnerships is going to be really important. I think banks, crypto businesses, we all need to work together. At the moment, that's not really happening. It is, and there are pockets of partnerships beginning to develop. But they really need to sort of embrace the strengths of what each other brings. Trust, stability, innovation, speed. There's a lot that can sort of come together. And I think together with central banks and regulators, this could really change the way the world operates when it comes to payments. And then finally, for me, which I'm quite excited about, is financial inclusion. I keep thinking about some of these countries in the world that has difficulty accessing correspondent banking. So we're in the West, we're quite, although I'm in Singapore, but you know what I mean. We're a little bit, we've got access to traditional banking, to payments, etc. But if you're an SME in a particular country that has weak correspondent banking, how do you globalize your business? How do you market and trade in different economies? Again, blockchain, it really brings, if done correctly, can sort of change the way in which banks operate, which in turn will better service the underlying user, which could be a business that's just looking to expand globally. So I think there's a lot. I've sort of given you my brain dump, but there's a lot, I think, in this space. And I think basically everyone needs to just really commit and focus and not get too derailed by what's been happening the last 6 months.
Thank you so much for your insights, Mish, and thanks to our audience for watching.